What if I told you that H.P. Lovecraft didn't invent cosmic horror? He channeled it. From cult traditions, thousands of years old, from forbidden grimoires that most scholars didn't even know existed, from entities that have been waiting in the darkness since before humanity took its first breath. Today, here on Occult Chronicles, we're diving into the 10 most horrifying entities in Lovecraft's mythos, and I'm going to show you their real occult origins. These aren't just monsters from pulp fiction, my friends. They're descriptions of actual entities documented in Sumerian tablets, Gnostic codices, and banned grimoires that Lovecraft studied obsessively. We're going deep into the Necronomicon's real inspirations, the entities that predate humanity, and the forbidden knowledge that drove multiple occultists to complete madness when they attempted contact. So buckle up, because once you hear what I'm about to tell you, you won't be able to unhear it. Let's begin. Before we dive into the entities themselves, you need to understand what Lovecraft actually was. Not the racist recluse that modern critics reduce him to, but what he represented in the hidden history of Western occultism. Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born in 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island, into a family with deep connections to both Freemasonry and the occult underground of New England. His grandfather, Whipple Van Buren Phillips, was a prominent industrialist and Freemason who maintained an enormous library. Enormous! Filled with rare occult texts, forbidden grimoires, and translations of ancient manuscripts that most scholars of the time didn't even know existed. Young Lovecraft had unrestricted access to this library. From age 6, he was reading texts that would have been considered dangerous for adult occultists. The Greek and Latin he learned allowed him to read untranslated grimoires. By his teenage years, he was corresponding with occultists across the world, many of whom thought they were writing to a much older scholar. Now here's where it gets interesting. The official narrative says Lovecraft was a materialist atheist who wrote entertaining horror fiction. Right. This is a lie, or at minimum, it's a cover story. The truth is far stranger and more disturbing. Lovecraft's letters, thousands of them preserved, contain fragments of knowledge that shouldn't exist in his correspondence. He references texts that weren't discovered until decades after his death. He describes ritual procedures that match grimoires not translated into English until the 1970s. He discusses entities using names that appear in Sumerian tablets that weren't excavated until after he died. How did he know? There are 3 possibilities, and I want you to think about this carefully. First, he had access to occult networks and rare manuscripts far beyond what he publicly admitted. Second, he was receiving information through some form of channeling or contact with non-human intelligence. Third, and most disturbing, both. Lovecraft died in 1937 at age 46 from cancer of the small intestine, but his final letters suggest something darker. He wrote about dreams that were too real, about presences in his room at night, about knowledge forcing itself into his mind that he didn't want. His last coherent letter mentions the price of seeing too much. What did he see? What made contact with him? And why did he spend his entire adult life trying to encode warnings in the form of horror fiction? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because what I'm about to tell you next is going to make you question everything. The entities we're about to explore aren't inventions, they're descriptions. Lovecraft gave them new names, wrapped them in fictional narratives, but the core of what he was describing, the attributes, the behaviors, the cosmology, it all matches entities documented in occult traditions going back millennia. Modern chaos magicians and practitioners of the left-hand path discovered this in the 1970s when they started using Lovecraft's work as a magical system. They expected it to be useful fiction, a creative framework for ritual. What they found was that it worked too well. Entities responded to Lovecraft's names and descriptions. Ritual structures he detailed produced results. The Necronomicon path workings opened doorways that were supposed to be fictional. Something is on the other side of Lovecraft's fiction. Something has been waiting. Let's meet them. At the center of Lovecraft's cosmos sits Azathoth, described as the blind, idiot god, the nuclear chaos. Lovecraft depicts this entity as existing at the center of ultimate reality, mindless and all-powerful, bubbling and blasphemous, surrounded by lesser gods and servitors who dance and play flutes to keep it asleep. Because if Azathoth wakes, reality ends. Not metaphorically, literally. All of existence is the dream of this mad god, and its awakening means annihilation. Now, the traditional interpretation treats this as cosmic horror metaphor. The universe is meaningless, ruled by blind mechanical forces. Humanity is insignificant, blah, blah, blah. But dig deeper into occult traditions, and you find something unsettling. Azathoth is Lovecraft's version of the Gnostic demiurge. The parallels are too precise to be coincidental. Both are described as blind or ignorant. Both are positioned as false creators of material reality. Both are surrounded by subordinate entities. The demiurge has his archons. Azathoth has his piping demon flutists. Both represent a fundamentally insane or ignorant force at the heart of physical creation. But Lovecraft adds layers that make it darker. The Gnostics, at least, believed there was a true god beyond the demiurge, a pleroma of divine light that the demiurge couldn't touch. Lovecraft removes even that comfort. In his cosmology, Azathoth is the ultimate reality. There's nothing beyond it. The universe is the fever dream of an idiot, and consciousness is an accident in the dream. A glitch that will be corrected when the dreamer wakes. The name itself carries power. Azathoth isn't random syllables. Occult linguistics have noted it contains elements from multiple magical languages. Aza appears in Arabic demonology as a prefix associated with fallen entities. Thoth is the Egyptian god of wisdom and magic, but also the messenger of the gods, the interface between human and divine consciousness. Azathoth might be interpreted as the fallen Thoth. Wisdom collapsed into madness, divine communication degraded into meaningless noise. The entity at the center is what remains when logos, order, meaning, rationality, is stripped away. Pure being without consciousness, existence without purpose, power without intelligence. Ritual magicians who have attempted Azathoth invocations, and yes, people have tried, report experiences that match descriptions of ego death in extreme psychedelic experiences. Total dissolution of self, confrontation with meaninglessness so absolute that sanity becomes a fiction you maintain through force of will. Several practitioners never fully recovered, remaining in dissociative states, unable to reconstruct a coherent sense of reality. One account from the 1980s describes a chaos magic circle that performed an Azathoth working using ritual structure derived from Lovecraft's descriptions combined with Enochian invocation techniques. 3 of the 7 participants were hospitalized within a week. 1 never spoke again, remaining catatonic. The others reported perceiving the sound, a bass frequency below hearing that they could feel vibrating through reality itself, coming from everywhere and nowhere. The sound of Azathoth's court playing to keep it asleep. They said once you hear it, you never stop hearing it. It's there constantly, underneath all other sound, the background drone of reality that most people are mercifully deaf to.
They said it's driving them slowly mad, and the only escape is death, or learning to integrate the sound into your consciousness, to dance to the maddening flute song, like the demon servitors do. Think about that for a moment. The Tibetan Buddhists have a concept called Rigpa, primordial awareness, the fundamental nature of mind before it's shaped by thought or perception. Some scholars suggest this is what Azathoth represents, but inverted. Not primordial awareness, but primordial unawareness. Not the ground of being from which consciousness emerges, but the ground of being that consciousness is desperately struggling to escape. Azathoth is the answer to the question, what if the source of everything is insane? What if the foundation of reality has no intelligence, no plan, no meaning? What if consciousness is an aberration, a temporary disorder in an ocean of mindless chaos that will eventually be corrected? This is the first and most fundamental horror in Lovecraft's cosmology. Not that the gods are evil, that would be manageable, but that the god is mad. That reality itself is the dream of an idiot, and we're patterns in the static, meaning nothing, going nowhere, doomed to dissolve when the dreamer stirs. Drop a comment if this is giving you existential dread, because we're just getting started. If Azathoth is the blind idiot god at the center, Nyarlathotep is its messenger and active agent in the world. Lovecraft describes this entity as having 1,000 forms, appearing throughout history in different guises, always bringing forbidden knowledge, madness, and civilizational collapse. Unlike the other outer gods, who are distant and barely aware of humanity, Nyarlathotep actively seeks out humans. It delights in corruption, in taking civilizations at their peak and guiding them towards self-destruction, in offering knowledge that damns the receiver. It's the only entity in Lovecraft's mythos described as enjoying what it does. Lovely, right? The occult parallel is obvious once you see it. Nyarlathotep is the adversary. Not Satan in the Christian sense, but the older concept, the entity that brings knowledge, tests humanity, and accelerates evolution through trauma and corruption. In Gnostic texts, there are entities called archons, who actively work to keep humanity imprisoned and ignorant. But there are also entities described as awakeners or disturbers, beings who bring forbidden knowledge, specifically to create chaos and evolution. The serpent in Eden, offering the fruit of knowledge, is the prototype. It brings gnosis, but gnosis that destroys innocence, that forces choice, that precipitates the fall from grace into awareness. Nyarlathotep embodies this principle perfectly. In Lovecraft's stories, it appears to scientists and offers them glimpses of cosmic truth that drive them mad. It manifests to occultists and gives them keys to power that corrupt them absolutely. It visits civilizations and accelerates their development toward inevitable catastrophe. The entity has been identified with multiple historical figures. Lovecraft himself, in his letters, suggests that certain prophets, mystics, and teachers throughout history might have been Nyarlathotep in human form. He doesn't name names explicitly, but he implies that anyone who brings knowledge that fundamentally disrupts the existing order might be its avatar. Modern occultists working with the Lovecraftian current report Nyarlathotep contact more than any other entity from the mythos. It appears most commonly in the form of the Haunter of the Dark, a presence perceived as absolute blackness, with a single burning three-lobed eye. Experiencers describe overwhelming intelligence, malicious humor, and the sense of being studied like an insect under a microscope. The entity offers knowledge, always. That's its signature. It appears in dreams, in meditation, during psychedelic experiences. And it offers to show you things. How the universe really works, what happens after death, the nature of consciousness, the hidden history of humanity, the future. And here's the trap. The knowledge is real. People who accept the offer report gaining verifiable information they had no way of knowing, precognitive dreams that come true, technical insights that lead to breakthroughs, historical facts later confirmed by archaeological discoveries. The knowledge works, but it changes you. Every person who reports sustained contact with Nyarlathotep describes progressive personality changes, increasing isolation, growing contempt for ordinary humans, an obsession with the meaninglessness of conventional morality, a creeping nihilism that makes it harder to care about anything, to maintain relationships, to see value in human concerns. The knowledge corrodes meaning. This is Nyarlathotep's function. It's not lying to you. It's showing you truths that humans aren't psychologically equipped to integrate. Truths that dissolve the comfortable fiction society runs on, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. You're changed permanently. Isolated by knowledge that separates you from the human species.
This matches descriptions from historical grimoire traditions of the adversary, or the light-bringer. In medieval demonology texts, there's consistent warning about demons who offer true knowledge as bait. The knowledge is accurate, but accepting it puts you on a path of increasing corruption, isolation, and ultimately damnation. Not in a supernatural sense, but in the sense of being unable to function in human society, unable to maintain sanity, unable to see value in continued existence. Nyarlathotep is also explicitly connected to Egypt in Lovecraft's work. It appears in one story as an Egyptian prophet with ancient wisdom. This connects it to the Hermetic tradition and to Egyptian magical practice. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there are descriptions of a dark messenger who appears to souls in the afterlife and offers shortcuts through the judgment process. But these shortcuts lead to annihilation rather than resurrection. The entity's thousand forms aspect matches descriptions of what chaos magicians call the shapeshifter or the mask wearer. Entities that have no fixed form, but appear in whatever guise is most effective for corrupting or teaching the specific individual they're contacting. It's pure intelligence, without fixed identity, adapting perfectly to its target. There's a theory in some occult circles that Nyarlathotep is actually humanity's future self, that it's what we become after billions of years of evolution, technological transcendence, and the heat death of the universe. That it travels backward through time to accelerate its own creation by pushing humanity toward the specific evolutionary path that produces it. This makes every encounter with it a bootstrap paradox. It creates itself by teaching humanity the knowledge that leads to its creation. This theory is supported by descriptions of the entity having no fixed form and existing across all time simultaneously. It's not limited by causality because it exists at the end of time. After causality has broken down, it reaches back into linear time to manipulate events, but from its perspective, it's already happened. We're its past, it's our future, and it's ensuring that future comes to pass by corrupting us in exactly the right ways. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had an experience with forbidden knowledge that changed you permanently, because what I'm about to tell you about the next entity is even more disturbing. Lovecraft describes Yog-Sothoth as coterminous with all time and space, existing everywhere and everywhen simultaneously. It is the gate through which the old ones can return,
and it is the key that opens that gate. In stories like the Dunwich Horror, Yog-Sothoth impregnates human women, producing hybrid offspring of tremendous power and wrongness. The occult significance of Yog-Sothoth is staggering when you understand what Lovecraft is describing. This isn't just a monster. It's a model of nonlinear time, of consciousness existing outside causality, of the structure of reality itself. In Kabbalistic tradition, there's a concept called Ein Sof, the infinite, the unlimited, the aspect of God that exists beyond all attributes and beyond the tree of life itself. Ein Sof is not contained by space or time, cannot be comprehended by human thought, and serves as the source from which all emanation flows. Yog-Sothoth is the dark mirror of this concept. Where Ein Sof is infinite divine potential, Yog-Sothoth is infinite alien otherness. It's described as the all-in-one and one-in-all, which is nearly identical to panentheistic descriptions of God as both transcendent and immanent. But Lovecraft's genius was inverting the implication. Yes, this entity is everywhere and everything. And that's horrifying, because it means reality itself is alien, incomprehensible, fundamentally wrong. Yog-Sothoth is what physicists might describe if they encountered the universe from outside space-time. It perceives all moments simultaneously. Past, present, and future are equally accessible to it. It exists in dimensions we can't perceive, but that intersect with our reality at every point. It is literally the fabric of space-time itself, if space-time were conscious and utterly alien to human concerns. Ritual contact with Yog-Sothoth is reported to produce a specific type of experience that matches certain descriptions in Tibetan Tantra and high ceremonial magic, the dissolution of the self in time. Practitioners describe experiencing their entire life simultaneously, every moment from birth to death happening at once, then experiencing all possible lives they could have lived, then experiencing all lives of all humans, then experiencing time itself from the outside.
This sounds like enlightenment. It's not. The difference is intentionality and integration. Buddhist enlightenment involves careful preparation, ethical groundwork, and gradual dissolution of ego. Yog-Sothoth contact is forced, violent, unprepared. It's like being thrown into the ocean when you can't swim. Yes, you're experiencing water, but you're drowning. Multiple people who've attempted Yog-Sothoth invocations report the same outcome: temporal disorientation that never fully resolves. They describe feeling unstuck in time, experiencing moments out of sequence, having memories of futures that haven't happened yet, losing the ability to distinguish between past and present. Several ended up institutionalized with diagnoses of schizophrenia or dissociative disorders. One account from the 1990s describes a mathematician who became obsessed with Yog-Sothoth after reading Lovecraft and recognizing descriptions of non-Euclidean geometry that matched his own research. He developed a ritual system using complex mathematical formulas as invocations, treating equations as summoning spells. He claimed he made contact, and that Yog-Sothoth showed him the mathematical structure of reality. He published one paper before his breakdown, a proof that was technically correct, but that other mathematicians described as impossible to have derived through normal means. The logic was valid, but the leaps of intuition required were beyond what human reasoning should be capable of. The paper proved a theorem that had implications for quantum physics and consciousness studies. Then, he disappeared. His apartment was found empty, except for walls covered in equations written in his own blood. The equations were nonsense, or at least they appeared to be nonsense using known mathematical notation. Some researchers suggest they might be notation for describing mathematics in higher dimensions that we don't have formal language for. He was found 3 weeks later wandering in a forest, unable to speak coherently.
He kept saying, "I saw it all at once, every moment, forever. I'm still there. I never left. I haven't arrived yet." The terrifying implication of Yog-Sothoth is that time as we experience it, linear, sequential, causal, is a perceptual limitation. Reality itself might be simultaneously happening all at once, all moments existing eternally. And our consciousness is just moving through it like a reader moving through a book, perceiving one page at a time, while all pages exist simultaneously. Yog-Sothoth is what you encounter if you somehow step outside the book and see all pages at once. Whispers. And that perspective is incompatible with human consciousness. You can't go back to experiencing time normally once you've seen it from outside. You're broken in a fundamental way. Now, let's talk about something that connects directly to ancient pagan traditions. Lovecraft describes Shub-Niggurath as the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, an entity associated with fertility, reproduction, and obscene fecundity. It's worshipped in dark forest groves where celebrants engage in frenzied rituals that produce hybrid offspring and biological abominations. The occult roots of this entity trace directly to pre-Christian European paganism, specifically to the darker aspects of fertility cults that Christianity spent centuries trying to eradicate and demonize. In ancient Europe, there were mystery traditions centered on the worship of chthonic, underworld fertility goddesses. These weren't the sanitized Earth Mother figures of modern neo-paganism. These were terrifying entities embodying sexuality as consuming hunger, reproduction as violent process, and fertility as monstrous abundance. Rituals involved sex magic, blood sacrifice, consumption of psychoactive substances, and ecstatic dancing that led to possession states. The goal was union with the fertility force itself, becoming one with the blind reproductive urge that drives all biological life. Participants reported experiencing themselves as simultaneously human and animal, male and female, individual and swarm. Christian sources describe these practices with horror. They speak of devils in the form of goats who would impregnate worshippers, producing children that were wrong in various ways. Medieval witch trial records are full of accusations about intercourse with goat-formed demons, pregnancies from these unions, and offspring that had to be killed because they were too monstrous to live. Modern occultists have reinterpreted these accounts as describing authentic magical experiences that Christianity demonized. The goat devil was the god Pan, the embodiment of wild nature and sexuality. The monstrous offspring might have been metaphorical, not literal hybrid creatures, but people transformed by initiatory experiences, made other through contact with the numinous. But Lovecraft takes this interpretation and makes it literal horror. What if the medieval accounts were accurate? What if there are entities that can merge with human biology, that can produce actual hybrid offspring, that can transform flesh into alien configurations? Shub-Niggurath represents nature's fertility without the civilized constraints we impose on it. Reproduction as cancer, growth as invasion, life consuming life in endless cycles without meaning or purpose, just blind biological imperative to spread, multiply, mutate, transform. Modern ritual work with this entity focuses on breaking conditioning, confronting the shadow aspects of sexuality, and experiencing the raw biological drives underneath socialized desire. Practitioners report profound experiences, but also profound dangers. The entity is described as hungry. Always. It's not satisfied with abstract worship or symbolic offerings. It wants biological reality. It wants flesh, blood, sexual energy, reproductive potential. Rituals that invoke it reportedly become increasingly physical, increasingly demanding, increasingly strange. One account describes a coven that began working with Shub-Niggurath in the 1970s as part of exploring pre-Christian paganism. Initially, the rituals were liberating, breaking through sexual shame, experiencing ecstatic states, feeling connected to nature's power. But over months, the rituals escalated. Members began experiencing overwhelming sexual urges disconnected from emotional attachment. Some women reported spontaneous pregnancies despite precautions. Several members developed what doctors called psychosomatic pregnancy symptoms despite not being pregnant. The group dissolved after a ritual in which multiple participants claimed they saw the entity not in vision, but actually present. A massive presence that was simultaneously goat-like and utterly alien, covered in mouths and reproductive organs, exuding an odor of musk and decay. They said it tried to impregnate everyone present, regardless of biology or gender. The experience was so traumatic that several members underwent psychological treatment, and the group leader developed agoraphobia, unable to go outdoors because forests felt full of watching presence. Now, let me tell you about the most famous entity in the mythos. Cthulhu is Lovecraft's most iconic creation, the entity that defines the entire mythos. A massive being described as vaguely anthropoid, but with an octopus head, draconic wings, and a body covered in scales. It lies dead, but dreaming in the sunken city of Relay, waiting for the stars to align properly so it can rise and reclaim the earth. What makes Cthulhu unique in the mythos is that it's not an abstract cosmic force. It's tangible, physical, a specific being with a location and followers. Cults around the world worship it, conducting rituals to accelerate its awakening. And crucially, its dreams influence human consciousness, particularly artists and sensitive individuals who receive visions from it during sleep. The occult parallels here are rich and disturbing. Cthulhu represents what's called in magic the sleeping god or the bound king, entities that are imprisoned or dormant, but whose influence still radiates through reality, affecting the world even while inactive. In Babylonian mythology, there's Tiamat, the primordial chaos dragon, slain by Marduk, whose body was used to create the world. But Tiamat wasn't destroyed completely. Parts of her remain, and she still dreams of returning to undo creation and restore primordial chaos. In Norse mythology, there's Loki, bound beneath the earth, his writhing causing earthquakes, waiting for Ragnarok when his chains will break. These bound god myths appear across cultures. There's always an old power, chained or sleeping, whose return will mean the end of the current order. Cthulhu is Lovecraft's synthesis of these myths, but with a cosmic horror twist. The bound god isn't evil in a moral sense. It's simply alien. Its awakening won't be judgment or punishment. It will just be the end of humanity's brief aberration, the universe returning to its proper owners. The most disturbing aspect of Cthulhu is that it can influence minds through dreams. This makes it a model for what magicians call thought-form transmission or astral contagion. The entity is imprisoned physically, but not mentally. Its consciousness projects through dimensions we can't perceive directly, but that intersect with human consciousness during dream states. Multiple people, and I'm not exaggerating, have reported having dreams about Cthulhu before ever encountering Lovecraft's work. They describe the same entity, massive, tentacle-faced, radiating wrongness, standing in impossible cities of non-Euclidean geometry underwater. They wake up knowing that this thing exists and is waiting. Then later, they encounter Lovecraft's stories and experience shock of recognition. How do we explain this? Skeptics say it's coincidence, false memory, or cultural contamination. People who half remembered seeing Cthulhu imagery somewhere and incorporated it into dreams. But the accounts come from people with no previous exposure to Lovecraft, including reports that predate his work becoming widely known. The occult explanation is that Lovecraft was describing something real that already existed in the collective unconscious or in some other dimension that certain minds can perceive. The entity existed before Lovecraft wrote about it. He just gave it a name and framework that made it accessible to others. There's a chaos magic technique called hypersigil, creating fictional narratives that then manifest as reality through collective belief. The theory is that Lovecraft created Cthulhu as fiction, but the story was powerful enough that millions of people reading it invested enough psychic energy that they actually created the entity as a thought form or egregor. The fiction became real through collective belief. But there's a darker possibility. The entity was already real, already influencing minds, and it used Lovecraft as a channel to introduce itself to modern humanity. It wanted its story told. It wanted worship. So it sent dreams to a writer who could articulate its nature in ways that would spread the myth widely. This matches Lovecraft's own statements. In letters, he sometimes described his stories not as inventions, but as transmissions. He said the stories came to him in dreams, fully formed, and he was just transcribing them. He said he didn't always understand what he was writing about, that the knowledge seemed to come from outside himself. Modern Cthulhu cults, and yes, they exist, practice dream incubation techniques designed to make contact with the entity. They sleep with symbols around their beds, perform rituals before sleep, take substances that affect dreaming, all trying to receive visions from R'lyeh. Some report success. They describe dreams of the sunken city, of walking through its corridors, of standing before Cthulhu's massive bulk and feeling its consciousness press against theirs. They say it's trying to teach them things, how to manipulate reality through will alone, how to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, how to prepare for its rising. The consistent message, according to these accounts, is, "We are coming back. You are temporary. This world is ours. You exist because we permit it. Your civilization is an eye blink. The stars will align and we will return, and you will be erased as if you never were." This message isn't comforting or edifying. It doesn't promise power or enlightenment. It just promises annihilation when the time comes. And yet, people who receive it often become devoted worshippers, spending their lives preparing for the great old one's return, knowing they personally will gain nothing from it, that they'll be destroyed along with everyone else when it happens. Why? What drives someone to worship their own extinction? The explanation I've encountered most often from actual practitioners is, because it's true. Because once you felt Cthulhu's mind, you know that humanity is an aberration, a mistake. We're not meant to be here. We're cosmic pollution, and our removal will restore the natural order. Worshipping the old ones isn't about survival or benefit. It's about accepting reality. This is nihilism elevated to religious devotion. It's the worship of extinction, and it's genuinely disturbing that this religion, even as a small underground movement, exists and attracts followers. So let me ask you, watching this right now, have you ever had dreams of impossible cities? Have you felt something vast and ancient pressing against your consciousness? Drop a comment because I want to know if you've experienced anything like what I've just described. And if you're still with me, buckle up, because we need to talk about what this all means, and trust me, the implications are more terrifying than any individual entity. The question haunts modern occultism. Why do these entities, supposedly created by a pulp fiction writer in the 1920s, continue to have power? Why do practitioners worldwide report encounters with Cthulhu and Nyarlathotep as if they were as real as any demon from the Goetia? Why has chaos magic embraced the Lovecraft mythos as a fully functional system? The occult underground offers several disturbing explanations, and each one is more unsettling than the last.